Okay, so whatever we do, it should be recorded. Okay, great. So now, mm, okay, let's have quick introduction as what we have already done it. We'll run through the slides. Most of the things we have just spoke upon it, and we'll have a look. Spring is the most popular application development framework. It's not application framework. It's not application container. It's a development framework for enterprise Java. Millions of developers use Spring to create high performance, easy testable, reusable code without any lacking. Okay. So couple of things which we have it in the Spring. This is where your Spring comes in. Spring has something called as framework, which has MVC. It has Webflow. Webflow is the one which I was trying to talk about. Everything we'll talk about a little later. Security, you have it. Spring integration. Spring integration is pretty good with ORMs like iBatis or your Hibernate or anything for that matter. You have web services, Spring Data, you have Spring Batch, and social. It's something like I want to connect to my website, want to connect to Twitter or Facebook. They have the API on the maybe just a piece of about 10-15 lines of code, and you can authenticate with that account, right? And so on. So let's have a quick look at the history. So as we tried discussing it, the first release was by Raj Jansen. First release was in 2003. I think I misspelled it as 2009. Okay. So milestone release is 2004 and 5. Uh, there are a lot of awards out there. Now you remember that I used to tell that a lot of annotations have come. Now they are one of the recommenders for that. Jax annotations and so on. So various releases, it's more of a days. Maybe I'll share this. You can spend some time if you are interested. Now makes J2E easier to use, makes a common task easier. So that's where the encouragement of highly cohesive application comes in. Promote good programming practice. You can focus only on domain problems. Leave all other things to Spring. It's an open source, lightweight. It's more of a Pojo based. It's modular. It's extendable, right? You can use Spring with the Hibernate. You can extend the features of Spring with the struts as well, and so on. And it has become almost the de facto model of our carpet industry now. So this is what it basically looks like. Not everything we touch base upon, but yes, at the overall view, this is what it looks like. So you look at this part, it's called as a core container. This is where we're gonna start now. The core container contains something called as beans. Now these beans can come in two flavors. One is configurable with XML or one configure with annotation. So we'll start with XML because it's easier for us to understand. Then you have core. The context is the one which sets the properties of the context level for getting the data and putting the data. They also have a support for expression language, which I would be integrating this with the web part. Okay. Plus, you have data access. It's more of data only. So you have something called a transaction. You do a transaction based on the JDBC and give the transaction to Spring. They do the one. Or OXM is there. So object XML mappings are there, right? That's where you have this JAXB and all coming in the world. ORM, the ORM they have internally, or you can use Hibernate one or iBatis or whatsoever, or you can use JMS service. Now in the web part, one is web, which we're gonna see. This is where our focus is, not all this we're gonna talk about. The servlet is, you can also have your own servlet. We'll try writing one simple program, if possibly, we'll do that, okay? Or you can integrate with the strut. Uh, Anytime here, we know this Facebook or all the sites, they are built on PHP, okay? So if you just deviate from Java, people talk about technology called as LAMP, AMP, WAMP, which is LAMP is Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. Now, what happened? It took its own popularity. Now, the reason is LAMP completely free, right? And why it is completely free? Because you have this web page, okay? Just have a look. You have a web page. The web page is actually bits and pieces of websites, I mean to say the web page is bits and pieces of websites. Right? If you look at the Facebook, Facebook is not at all a website now. It has become a web application. You have chat coming in, the timeline coming in, you have birthday reminders, blah blah blah, all those things. Is it not? Now, if you have a chat coming, the entire page does not work. Of course, I can try achieving this with something called as Ajax. Possibly, yes. We are not denying that. But at the server end, how do you do it? The PHP, if you look at the PHP is like a JSP file. Whatever you want a HTML code, you put it. You want PHP code, you can just put it. Okay? But how do you do it in Java? That was not possible. So they wanted something called as portlet. Now what is portlet? You have a JSP page. Keep your JSP page as it is. Do not disturb. The JSP page is composed of different websites. Each website can be one portlet for you. One company uses this extensively called as lifecycle. They use it extensively. The lifecycle depends on portlet. Okay, so if you're planning something like dashboard creation, the portlets are the solution for Java technology. Okay, that's where you have it. Of course, the good thing is they're all there, and you have a test framework. The test framework here, it could be the test-ng or your JUnit. Anything, it goes the same way. Not too much fancy about it. So provides the fundamental parts of the framework, including the IOC and dependency injection, the context, access objects in the framework style, which is basically the way how our JNDI works, and expression language. It's basically for querying and manipulating the values and so on. Okay, that's where we get started. So you have this AOP, aspect, instrumentation, all this blah blah blah. We're gonna come back to this little later. No, we'll get started first. Okay. So first and foremost, we'll go with the core aspect. We'll try having the hello world in place first. What I do is I'll go back to this folder right in D drive. I call it as libs. This is what it looks like in your case. I would say right click. What do you say? Extract here. So you'll find the file with the .txt extension. The only reason is I was not allowed to put the zip file directly on the cloud, so I had to rename it to .text and goof it around. Right, that was the only intention. Right. So when you extract that, you will get .txt. Okay. So in my command prompt, cd libs, you have a file which is called as lib.txt, rename, you call it as lib.zip, so that you'll get a zip folder. Okay, this again extract here. Cancel. Extract it to lib. And if not, the older file was replaced. So when I double click, what happened? The libs. Just 1 second. This is what we downloaded, extracted it. It's lib cd lib dir, rename lib.txt to lib.zip. Extract here, and I should find the jars. Okay, just extract it. So it has lot more things. You have Hibernate support also. We can use some annotations possibly. You see this jar commons login. We tried using it. Log4j, they use commons login. Aspect Weaver is there. We're gonna talk about all these things in some time. DOM4j, and DOM4j is basically for the construction of DOM. Spring uses DOM as a constructor for the hierarchy. Okay. Should that be okay? We have extracted that. We have extracted that. Okay. Yeah. So let's put it on, since it's a core project, we'll put it on the mm, build path. I'll right click, new, Java project. I call it as Spring Work. Next, finish. So I'll right click on the Spring project, build path, configure build path, libraries, add external jars. Uh, Maybe in the libraries you just have to find it. I'll say Control A. Up. So in the order, I'll just set the order. I'll select all. I'll put this in the bottom, and it's all done. Apply. Okay. So this is where you have all the reference jars. Is we done? Are we done? Now, uh, in my source, I try creating a package. I'll say like com dot my package. Okay, and I will also create a source folder. Now, this creation of source folder is absolutely optional, right? But it's always good to have it. Okay, on your source, as you create the package, so I'll say right click, new, source folder. Okay, you can give this folder name anything, but I just give it as XML files, like context files, config files, whatever you want. So I give it as XML files. So all our XML configuration will go here, and source code should go here. That's what my understanding is. So we got this beans.xml file. So what we do is we'll just copy paste it. So I would copy this beans.xml file. I'll just right click, copy, and paste it. Is that okay? There's not much fancy about this beans.xml as of now. Okay, you just have some namespace, some tags called as beans and so on. Yesterday, what we did it for test ng. Okay, so this I've just copied it from Spring. There's nothing fancy about it. Okay, so just before we could start, what we got to do it in the first program. Let's see. Now I got to tell Spring couple of things. Hey, look at the Spring. I want an object, but this time the object creation you have to take, and you should take. Now what is the need of it, and so on. I have a sample example. I don't know if I could share that. That's not on the banking and all. It's like geometry kind of thing. I'll share that. Maybe it gives us pretty clear understanding of what it is. Mm, just give me a second. Okay, so let's assume a couple of things, guys. Now, how basically we gonna work on the real-time scenario? Now, what I my intention is pretty simple. I have a class called a circle, and I have a class called a triangle. Now, somewhere somebody's gonna write the application class. Am I right? So when you try writing the application class, your class would look something like this. Am I right? So you would say, hey, triangle T is equal to new triangle, rectangle R is equal to new rectangle. And maybe if you have a method called as area or draw or whatever, you try invoking it. Am I right? But this program has a problem. The program is tightly coupled. The application or your application class is doing most of the thing. So I want to have separation of concerns. So when I talk about separation of concerns, we try going with something like polymorphism. So when I try using polymorphism, what I do is I'm not going to have a method called as draw inside a method called as triangle or rectangle or trapezium or whatever. I'm going to have a method called as draw in shape and let these people implement it. Am I right? So that now I need not have an object of circle or triangle. I can have an object of or a reference of shape, and I can say shape dot draw. At the runtime, I can say whatever I want. Is that okay? Are we clear enough? Okay. Now the same program, if I try taking it a little more, I gotta take this, and this is what your program looks like. I have an object called a shape every time. I'm not gonna have a reference of triangle or rectangle because when I have an object of rectangle or triangle, that is bounded only for that object. But if I have a reference of shape, now just tell me what is this shape? Is it like factory what we discussed? You got to go back to the discussion what we had for design pattern. You have to correlate that now. We saw something called as factory pattern. Why do we need factory pattern? Very good. So you need only one reference, good. But factory can be a pool of objects what you want. Now I say, hey, look at the factory, give me this. Now factory will create and give it to you. How factory creates, I don't know. Am I right? So here, that's what we're gonna do it now. I say, hey, I want my business logic. Forget of this code, don't look at this. Look at this part. Only this two. Can you tell me which figure it is? But will it work for any figure you pass? Why? So at the topest level, what I want is a reusability. That's this is what we're gonna write it in Spring. You concentrate on what you want. You don't be bothered about this. You never write this. Who will do this? This is dependency injection. This is dependency injection. You gotta do this. So we're gonna say something like this. Hey, draw method. I'll say shape. If it is triangle, I pass the shape. Now this will be the. Is that okay? Right? So what we did, we started making a lot of highly cohesive application developments rather than having tightly coupled application development. That's where the Spring first fits in. That's the first use of Spring. Do not write the first code, write this code. Okay, so we'll get started with this. Okay, couple of things which we try having it now. First and foremost, on the one hand, I have an application. So when you say application code, we call it as you call it with different names, client, demo, end user, whatever. That's a client code. The client code does not need it. Now what client code needs? It needs an object of employee, customer, account, bank, whatever. Okay? But unfortunately, if the client tries saying employee is equal to new employee, you are creating an object. No, I don't want this. Now what I say, hey, I forget this person. Okay? I will say, hey, look at the string container. Now all your information, what I want, is recorded in a special file called as something.xml. I'm saying you something.xml. The name you have used it as bean, I have used it as beans, you can use whatever you want. It's not like your structs. In structs, the name has to be structs.xml. You cannot make it as structs1.xml, it will not work. But here, absolutely your choice. Okay? Now I say, hey, look at this, I complete XML. Now what does this XML have? It has an XML. Now, each of the entries in the XML is called as one bean. Each of the XML entries is called as one bean. Each bean has unique ID. It has a class associated. Okay? For which the class we have. Am I clear? Now, this class, which is called as a bean class, can have one of the two possibilities to accept the parameters. Either it can take the parameters in the form of a setter or constructor. Right? So either you got to pass it as a constructor or setter. You pass however you want. Now this time, I'm not going to take it. I have an application that says string. Can you look at the string? I need this. So it says, what is the bean ID? I need a bean color. Yeah, give that. Okay? By default, it has a behavior of singleton. I'm going to talk with you. Okay? So, first thing, we're going to create a bean. Okay? So, let's go ahead. Yes, should that be okay? Conceptually? Clear. Okay. I'm going to create a package com dot, I call it as com dot my package dot beans. You can of course put it in the same package. I'm just using a different name. I would use a class. Let me use a class. I call this class as employee or account, transaction, whatever of your choice. Okay. Now let's not make too complicated with this, since we are creating for the first time. Private int employee ID. That's it. I want to stop with the two attributes, not too much fancy about it. Okay. So if you want a couple of more attributes, you can go ahead with that. But I'm okay with two of them, because let's make it as tiny and clear. Give me a second. Perfect. So now I'll go to source. You can make this as a bean class. Select all. Okay. Is that okay? Now I'll go back. Beans, that's what we have it. The first class is done. We out of 3 discussion, 2 we have already done it. So one is the beans class, one is XML file. We need the client now. So you can put it right here, or I'll create a package here. I call it as com.mypackage.client. I call it as com.mypackage.client. In the client, you create like the class, you call it as, I call it as P1 line. So I just start with P1, P2, P3, P4 so that it's easier for us to remember, right? Or you call it as C1, which is for client 1 or whatever name. That's your choice, Chris. No problem. We just try remembering. Okay. So now I'll have main. This is where I got to start. We can do with one of the two possibilities here, right? We want an object called employee, okay, but not with new. That's the first rule. We got to make sure that, okay, it should not be like with new. It should be with that. If you say new, you have to destruct it. That's additional overhead, which we don't like it now. So we're gonna give a pause for this program for some time. We'll go back to this beans.xml. Go to this file, beans.xml. Okay. So in my beans.xml, if you look at the tag, it says beans. It's plural. You can have beans. In each of the beans, I can have bean. Each bean is the one which you are referring it. Now, I'll say bean. So now, if you have 100 beans, all beans should be entered here. You don't like it, you have annotation based configuration. Don't worry. But do not go with 100% annotation based configuration. What happens over a period of time? I'll tell you a couple of examples what has happened. People don't write anything here, they just leave it. Just like for the heck of having it, people have it and leave it. Everything is annotation. For any application, for any debugging, there should be a starting point. If you don't make an entry and you have million classes, you have no clue what is happening. A good application design should never be annotation based, neither be XML. It should be a blend of. Now, there are few people in the world, they are very, very stringent about annotation. Yes. Who are those people? People only in mobile industry. People who come from web industry, they don't mind. Because in my system, XML file, if you have 1000 classes, it might take around 3-4 kbs or 5 kbs or 10 kbs. Does not make any difference. But the same for a mobile makes a difference. Now you have to switch back. Anyways, we're gonna go back here. Okay. The first attribute, you have a lot of attributes. Maybe if you want, you can spend a minute. It's quite self-explanatory here, right? Okay, can we guess abstract is equal to true? Abstract is equal to true. What does that mean? You want to make this class as abstract. Perfect, no problem. You have this. Auto-aware, I'll come back to this, the second and third limit. The class, which class? Depends on, it depends on the factory bean. So I have a bean class that most of the beans are dependent on another bean. So we can call it as factory bean. You have ID. You want life cycle? You want a life cycle for a bean? By default, Spring is eager. Now, what is mean by eager? For example, I have 100 beans. Good, congrats. The moment the application starts, all 100 beans are loaded into the container. Immaterial, you need it or not. You don't want make that bean lazy in it true. By default, it is eager. Now, when you say lazy in it true, what happens? Only when you invoke that, the bean is loaded. Right? So they're all like whatever people wanted it over a period of time, they have just found it. Okay. So to get started, we will have ID. So this should be unique. You can give any name. I'll give it as EMP. You can give any name of your choice, and just have to use the same in your application. Nothing much fancy about it. Now this bean refers to a class. What class it is? The class is called com.mypackage.beans.imply. Just take the hold control and take your mouse pointer on it. It should show it as an anchor. So that's just a guarantee that we have not made any typo mistakes. That's it. Okay. So if you have a look at the employee class, we don't have the constructor. It's a default constructor. Okay. By default, it will just invoke the default constructor. Maybe if you are willing to pass some value, we have got some setters. I would say when you say control space, you have constructor arguments. You see something called as property. You see something called as property. Good. How many properties we have? We have two properties. The first property name is called as EMPID. I'm gonna copy this. You can try doing it. And for this, the value is maybe 101. Property name is equal to something. EMP name. Let's say Rohit. You're just building a wireframe now. We're talking about skeleton, not the stuff. Tomorrow you want a different value, you come here and change it. In fact, it is also possible these values which you say 1, 101, Rohit and all can also come from property file or from external resources. That's a different story, right? That will be a little out of bounds of our discussion here for today, right? I can even have a property file for this. Now, what is good thing? Tomorrow Rohit is not there, Bhaskar has come, your code never needs to be compiled. Works perfectly fine. Okay? Is getting it? Any questions? Yes, no, maybe. Okay. Yeah? Yeah, please. No, I have no question. Okay, sorry. So now I keep this as a blueprint. Okay? Go back to this place. I say by not with new, I got to create it. There are various ways of creating it. So let me show you the deprecated way, which is the old way, and we'll see why we should not use that also. So that's called as XML bean factory. That's anyways deprecated. We're gonna delete this. Now it has its own disadvantages. We're gonna talk about this. XML bean factory. It works fine. You see the expected output. Few other features does not work. I'll show you what. Is equal to new XML bean factory. Look at this. It tries taking some parameter. It tries taking some parameter. Okay. Now, what is this XML bean factory? I would say all the bean which you try having should be recorded in this place. And remember, Spring uses something called as DOM parser. That's what I tried telling you. And you have this jar as well. 1 second. DOM forges. What it does is, given an XML file, it creates a DOM hierarchy and keeps it in. Okay, the entire DOM is given for this object called as factory. Okay, the entire XML file is made it as an object and given to this object called as factory. Okay, in the factory, I'll say, hey, look at this. You're gonna create XML factory. Where is this file coming from? The file can come from anything. It can come from a physical path, network path, or a class path. The class path is right there. The network, when you say the file path, you got to say that new file of D drive slash something slash something slash. Okay, but in my case, it's in the class path. I would say new class path resource. The file name is called as beans.xml. The file name is called as beans.xml. Right? So what we did? Oh, I want to construct a factory from a XML file which is present in the class path by the name beans.xml. So what happens? All the beans which you got, it's all constructed here. So on the verge of constructing, you see this 101 Rohit is also kept in there because it's a value which you got. Since the advantage of DOM parser is they can parse however you want. You can go up and down anytime. Right? So if you do that, 90% program is done. It's only one more line you are invoking. Okay? Right? Now, I would say I want employee object. Perfect. From this bean, I need an employee object. I call it as employee. Where is this employee coming from? It's coming from factory dot. What was bean? We tried writing something called as bean. For the bean, you have get bean. What was the bean name? What was the bean name? Perfect. EMP. In my case, it is EMP. I'll say it as EMP. And do remember, Spring returns every bean which you have in the form of an object. We got to explicitly typecast it. This is one way of doing it. There's another way I'm going to talk about. Then I will say employee ID emp dot get employee ID emp dot. Let me just check by clicking play. We are there. I'll show you one more thing. You have one object. Okay. I'm going to copy this. Just have a look at this for a minute. I'm trying to create 3 times. Okay. And one small change. I go back to this employee class. We know that it has created, when it is created, it has used the default constructor. I'm gonna say public employee employee constructor is called. So some message is there. Perfect. How many times you are calling it? How many times you say get bean, get bean, get bean? Whenever you say get bean, what should happen? It should create an object, right? You will see that only once. This is because by default the Spring is singleton. Okay, by default the Spring is singleton. They do not create an objects. They manage the show with singleton. Okay, So ideally what should happen? For this one which you have created, it has created, now it looks into the pool. Okay, is this object created? Yes. If it is created, I don't create it. Now you have a requirement. Says that, sorry Naveen, we want three different objects. Good. Go back to beans.xml, scope, prototype. Scope is prototype. Now let me go back. Play. Oh, the object is correct. Three times, three constructors. Every time you say this get bean, a new constructor object is created. But by default, they don't do it. Very cautious. Now, which one suits your business logic? Absolutely left. 99% of the case, you go with the default behavior of it, because they manage things better than them. Yeah, yeah. And one good thing what we have is, though we use prototype, still it does internal mapping. We can't do. Yeah, right. It takes. The owner is Spring. In fact, now we have to talk. We are using Spring M5, not M5. Yes, 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 exactly. Just check if we are getting it. So by default is single. It takes only 2 minutes. Single. If you don't specify, single. Now, now, why is it different? We're gonna say something called as XML bean factory. Factory is equal to new XML bean factory. This class is not single, right? Now, if you remember in Hibernate, I used to say these factory objects are resource intensive objects. If you have 1,000 beans in a bean, right? So it's gonna take everything. So this factory object has become very heavy now. You're gonna have one more called as factory one. That will have another flow now. You have 200, 300. Uh-huh. Because when Spring was created, this was pretty old one. When this was created, this class is not similar. The beans inside that are similar, okay. But that class itself is not similar. For this, we have application context. The context classes are all similar. Those are not applications. This is application. Like little legacy code kind of. Okay. Is done with this? Okay. So I'll just go ahead and try commenting this part, and I don't want multiple entries. I'll keep only one entry. Perfect. So this time, instead of factory, I use application context. Application context. Generally, people use the name as context. I just use it by the name. I call it as context or CTX, whatever. Okay, is equal to new application new, yes, new class path XML application context of the file name called as bean start XML. So the CTX, I'll just put it this way. Right. So now these classes are all, this is an interface, and they're all singleton. And click on this. Perfect. It works. Okay. So most of the cases we're going to use application context rather than our XML bean factory. It's the first reason is singleton. There's one more class better than this. I'll tell you where it is. No, this is class. This is interface. This was class. This was class. That's the first difference, right? Huh. But you will not have multiple copies now. That's guaranteed. We are okay if it is heavy, but our problem was to have multiple entries. We should not have. We don't want that factory itself to be repeated twice or thrice. Okay, is getting it? We'll move further. Okay, now I have something like this. Let's assume that I have this employee class where I have an entry in .xml file. Now I have some requirement. Before this class is loaded, I want to do something. Okay, I want to have a method in the same bean. I call it as init. I want to have another method which is called as destroy. I want that to be. Now again, the method name, it could be anything. Just as a convention, I'm using it as init and destroy. But I want that to be called. Okay. So let's go back to our code. Here we will try having public void init of employee called. Okay. Public void destroy of employee called. Okay. So you can have this method name anything of your choice. Now I should also tell Spring, okay, these methods are the one which is for init, these methods are the one for destroy. So where do we say that? XML, perfect. So I'm gonna go back. This is where I'll have it. Which one? Yes. That's a life. So now I'll say init method is init. They don't take any parameters, nothing. And you also want to say destroy method, destroy. Okay. Now, done with this? Now let me just go back to client employee. I'll click on play. Oh, employee constructor called, good. The init of employee is called, that's good. You try doing some setter, perfectly fine, but destructor did not work. Your destructor is not supported for this, or this interface does not have destructor call. Okay, in order to call destructor, I will try commenting this. You have another interface which is called as abstract application context. Okay, abstract application context. It still refers to new class path application context. Now, once your job is all done, I would say ctx dot register shutdown hook. So this hook is something which we tried talking yesterday for a scenario. I'm done with the job. I just have to do something like after. So this is like after job. Now you also see yeah. Which one? I'll just check. Right? I click on play. Okay. Other business logic codes. 1 second. register shutdown code. It should say destroy of employee called. Okay, so the problem is here with the prototype. So since we have used prototype, it says that okay, now it's your responsibility to do this garbage collection. So it should not be prototype. Now I click on play. Destruction of the employees card. Okay, so to remember, if the bean scope is prototype, then destruction is not done. Okay. No, what this does, just a shutdown for what it does is, if you go to the context, if you look for all the beans, in the beans, if you look, does that bean have destroyed? If that destroyed is there, it is after complete loss. Yeah, when the scope of the it is scope to be prototype. Right. Okay, just to look at beans which will have destroyed or have destroyed. To follow the life cycle. So if you want to adhere to life cycle, this I don't see any value of doing this because you already defining very clearly in the bean XML which one has to destroy. But your application context does not do it. That's a problem. I'm not talking about abstract now. If you have application context, they don't invoke the destroy. They don't follow the life cycle. Only application context. I'm sorry, abstract application context. So it will not basically follow what you have written in bean XML. Yes, it follows only for start, not the destroy. It's a redundant. No, they have a lot of other methods as well. Right? So abstract will also look for, there is one example which I tried for configurer, for our property file configurer. So they all help. Yeah, I know, right? No, when we say context are closed, we are focusing on the context. When we say we have to shut down code, we are to go on the descriptor of the yeah, yeah. Is that a thing? By default, it does. No, you're expressing the same string. Don't look at this class. Prototype and back. Then if you want to do that, to say that the method name practice. Or let's consider prototype. I think we'll be able to. As simple as writing you. Let's say you take. You say whatever is the string in the compiler, you have to this might be a method. Starting. Yes, are we done? Yes, are we done with this? Okay, so we'll move further. Imagine I just have one more requirement here. I have two beans. Okay, I've got two beans, and for some reason, these two beans have got the same lifecycle method, like init and destroy. So what I can do is, in the bean one, I can say init method is init, destroy method is destroy. For the second bean, init method is init, destroy method is destroy. You can again go upward. But if I have about hundreds of beans, you can't do this. Or I can get rid of this right here. Okay. At the beans level, default init method is init, default destroy. So you have another bean, you don't put anything here, just leave it as it is. If that class has init and destroy, it should do it. Let's check. Perfect. Okay, that's for all the beans which you try having. All will yes. A different method, then it will not work. That's all. Yes. Most of the time, what people do is they have the method, they don't write anything. If you don't want, that's it. Okay. Default init method, default destroy method. It's not init method and destroy method. Default init method, default destroy method. So if you don't write anything, then we have a good control. No, it will never do that. It will not understand what we are trying. Okay, getting it, man? No. Okay. Okay, shall we try creating another scenario? Okay, we try doing something called as we want to do some dependency injection, little genuinely, right? Something like this. Okay, so let's try drawing it right here. Now we know that setter properties. In the setter, if you have a look, we tried giving something like value. Okay, I will have a scenario something similar to this. Okay, so I want a class called as employee now. Okay, this employee class will have emp id, maybe the I don't want name, I want a class called as name. We remember that has a relationship. Okay, name which has first name, last name, like middle name or whatever. Now these three, if you have a look at this, they are very good candidates. They are all values. Okay, now this happened to be value, but this one is not a value. They refer to this. Am I right? So I would say, hey, this bean is dependency injection for the employee bean, right? We'll try creating some scenario like this. Okay, so this hierarchy can be any level. You can have one has a relationship, you can have multiple has a relationship, that absolutely left to you. Okay, but yes, just want to show that. Okay, good. So let's go back. I would just try creating that. I would say like this. In the beans, I try creating a class. I call it as name, private string first name, private string, last name, middle name. Okay. Okay. So quickly make this as a bean class. Okay. Is done with this? Okay. So source, generate getters and setters, select all. Okay, perfectly done. Right. Now back to our employee class. I have employee ID. I don't want employee name, but this name has to be private name. I'm not gonna have the setters. I will have a setter. But you can roll over the mouse and say that create getters and setters. Okay. So that has a relationship with this object. Yeah. So I'm trying to create an object of this class. So it has a relationship. Is that? Now, I'll just go back to this beans.xml. I got to refactor it a little bit. But just before I could fill in this employee class, I say bean ID is, you can give any name, class is com dot my package dot beans dot name. Let me just check. Take the mouse pointer on it. It should be anchor tag. Property name is first name. You can just copy this and put it. First name. I gonna say value is Naveen. I'm gonna copy this. Last name and middle name. Perfect. Let's see. Okay. Now this of course is of no use now. Okay. I would say property name is name, but this time I'm not going to go with the value because it's not value, it is a reference. right? So what we did, when you have absolute value, you can specify it here. But if you have the reference, you can just say it as ref for that. So it will look for the reference called as name, and this property value will be assigned to this. There you are setting first name to, last name to, middle name to some values. Okay, is getting it. Now we just have to do a get bean of employee. We need not do get bean of name. We don't want. So let's go back. Done with this? Okay. Now this one I'll delete it. If first name is up dot get name dot get first name. Perfect. Employee last name. Up dot get name dot get last name. Middle name is up dot get name dot get middle name. Perfect. Done. You still did this stuff and every values are changed in the XML file. I'll click on. So here you have the value. Okay. Because we'll go for lunch and come back. Then we'll continue. A couple of topics are there. No, no, no. Yeah, we use Eclipse. STS is Eclipse for Spring. It's ID. There are little more drag and drop tools are there. Nothing special about it. But of course, I tried using some time, but I did not like. It's the same Eclipse.